So the first thing I want to say is hello and welcome everyone to celebrating 30 years of Scrum, from a single sprint to lasting change. I'm your host, Tom Bullock. I'm the chief storyteller here at Scrum Inc. And all of us at Scrum Inc. want to thank you all for joining us today. This is a pretty big milestone, and we're really glad that you could be here with us to celebrate it and for this conversation. What is now a global phenomenon started as an experiment some 30 years ago. One team, one sprint, one goal, and a simple but profound idea on a new way to achieve it. Today, 3 decades on, Scrum is nothing short than the most widely used agile framework on Earth. It's powering millions of teams and countless organizations every day. And that's thanks in large part to you. Everyone who has joined us on this webinar today, members of the Scrum community, all of the Scrum masters and product owners and team members and leaders who use Scrum to unlock what is possible every day. So from Jeff and JJ, myself, and all of us here at Scrum Inc., we want to start this celebration by saying thank you. Thank you for your dedication, your ingenuity, for making what some still see as theoretical very real, delivering very real results. Now, in fairness, our 2 guests here today had a bit to do with making Scrum the framework that it is. First, I'd like to introduce JJ Sutherland, best-selling author, innovator, consultant, and the CEO here at Scrum Inc. Always good to see you, JJ.
Good to see you, Tom, and welcome everybody. This is it's an honor to have everyone here to celebrate 30 years on.
Yeah. And honestly, our other guest truly needs no introduction, but it's my pleasure to give him one anyway. Dr. Jeff Sutherland, the co-creator of Scrum, creator of Scrum at Scale, founder of Scrum Inc., and signer of the Agile Manifesto. Jeff, it's been a while. It is a pleasure to see you here today.
It's great to be here, and I'd really like to thank all of you here for the webinar, because you are the ones that made Scrum possible. It's amazing to me that Scrum actually increased in market share last year, according to the last survey. It's pretty hard when you got 80% market share to actually get more market share, but it's totally amazing. And I want to give a shout out to the first Scrum team. Jeff McKenna, who was the coach of the first Scrum team and continues to be an active Scrum trainer, sent me a note yesterday and said he was going to be here, so I hope he's here. He actually participated in the team in 1993 at Easel Corporation in Burlington, Massachusetts, as we were forming what we only started calling Scrum around the end of 1993. And John Scumbliatalis, who was our first Scrum Master, is another key person on that team that needs to be mentioned, because those 2 people actually worked with me and with the rest of the team to create what we have today. So thank you, first Scrum team, and thank you particularly Jeff McKenna and John Scumbliatalis.
And Jeff, we hope you're in the audience. Thank you from all of us. You helped make this very real. So that, I didn't know that, Jeff. That's amazing. Let me also say congratulations to you. I have to ask, I'm dying to know, 30 years, that's a big deal. That's a long time. This is clearly not some kind of management fad. There are countless of those that have come and gone during the time that Scrum has continued to thrive. Jeff, how does it feel to see what the Scrum framework has become 30 years after its creation?
Well, I'm grateful for its tremendous success, but when we started, I knew it would take at least 20 years for something like this to evolve into maturity and to spread widespread. You never know what's going to happen, but we knew that we had benchmarked it carefully when we created it, and we knew it was a really effective and better way of building product. And so I'm just really grateful it's caught on, and I'm grateful all of you are here today to celebrate with me its success.
So let's go back to that first Scrum team. I guess I'm going to call it a Scrum team, even though you hadn't used that terminology yet. Set the stage for us, Jeff. What problem were you trying to solve? Why was it created?
Well, Easel Corporation at the time was the leading 4GL language software company. And IBM had taken their easel tools and sold them all over the world. But there were other companies coming on board. A lot of competition was entering the field. And so Easel decided to acquire a German company that had Smalltalk technology that could be used to build a next generation product. And they didn't even know what the product was. And they were searching for someone who had done a lot of new product launches to come in as a chief engineer to launch that product. And they had worked through dozens of people. And finally, the CEO, I was president of an object database company. And the CEO came to me and said, "Hey, Jeff, we need to have somebody that's done this before. Would you come in and we'll give you the best people in the company, take a small team, create a completely new product line to replace all of our current products." And it sounded interesting to me. And so I decided to give it a shot. So I came in just like a chief engineer out of Toyota. What are we going to do? And the first thing we had to do was figure out what the product would be. Mm-hmm. It turned into Object Studio, which is a development environment, which even this past year, some leading industry people have told me they are still using this product today, 30 years later. They were in the beta of that product in 1994. They're still using it, and they're saying it's still one of the best 5 software product development and tools that's ever been built, which, again, kudos to the first Scrum team. They have a product that lives today that's still considered one of the best in the industry.
Yeah. So you have a vision, you have a goal, you've laid out the basics here, but let's get into the stuff that really we don't talk about really in class or anything. And I promise we're going to look ahead to the future Scrum as well, but this is a celebration. So let's do a retrospective on the very first sprint, Jeff. Walk us through that. What was that like?
Well, we had a sprint backlog. We had a burn down. We had to figure that out. We had decided to call it Scrum. John Scum-Natales was the Scrum Master. We did 1 month sprints, which today we view as way too long, but we didn't know any better. And we successfully, the first sprint, we had a tough time getting the software to demo properly. And I had worked with people from the Media Lab at MIT, and I knew that the demo was really important. And we had adopted the model from MIT's Media Lab, demo or die. And since the demos were not working well, in the first sprint, I said, we're going to demo every Friday, and I'm going to get engineers from other software companies, competitors in the area, and they will come in and they will be the guys that you will demo to. And the first demo they did, the system crashed. It didn't even work. Then the next week, the engineers came back in again, and they looked at it and they said, this software, you should look at what Microsoft is doing and what Borland is doing, because your user interface, it really sucks. and then the engineers, their competing engineers from other companies left, and almost every person just put on their head on the table and started moaning, like, we don't know if we can do this anymore. And I said, well, you have a choice. If you want to be a great tennis player, you got to play with people that are better than you are. Or you could just be an average tennis player and not let any of the guys that are great see what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You have to decide. And to their credit, this was one of the points in time that was really pivotal. To their credit, they all picked up their head and said, we will do one more demo. So thank God for that, because we wouldn't be here today if they didn't do one more demo. That was the first sprint.
And So you get through the first sprint, the demo or die that definitely felt more like the latter than the former in that statement. It was brutal. They agreed to do one more. What was the team like after this? Were they immediate converts? Did they still need some persuading? When did it start to take hold?
Well, the third demo went fairly well. Then so by the end of the sprint, we had a successful sprint review and retrospective. What happened though, then coming into the next sprint, one of the things we were doing was building the product was half of what we were doing. The other half was building a framework for using the product to deliver software faster, better, less expensive. And so we were studying productivity. And I said, in every new technology I've worked with before, we had to research every paper ever written on what we were doing in order to go beyond. And that typically meant at least 1,000 published papers. And shortly before the first sprint, we were up to about 300 papers. And we read Takeuchi Tanaka's new product development game. And our practice was if the team would all read a paper like that the same day, and we'd have a retrospective at 5 o'clock. And out of that paper, we got the name Scrum. But then in mid-sprint February, we read a paper on the Borland Quattro product, written by Jim Copeland, who was at Bell Labs at the time and had done an audit of Borland and shown they were the fastest software team ever documented in the literature, I think certainly before and maybe since. And they were delivering millions of lines of code a week. And we looked at that paper, we said, what are they doing that we're not doing? Because we were already pretty fast. But they had a daily meeting that we didn't have. So in the middle of the second sprints, we said, we need to introduce a daily meeting from that paper. And then the latter, I believe it was the latter half of February, Jeff McKenna, if you're out there, correct me if I'm wrong. It was really the latter half of February, we refined that meeting. And one of the interesting things that came out of that refinement was it wasn't just the meeting, it was the way we looked at the system as a whole, and the team all together collectively said, what is the most important thing to do today to move that system to where we want it to be? And what is the least amount of work we can do to create a ripple effect through the system that will give us new functionality faster? And by the end of February, we had figured that out. And coming into March, we took yesterday's weather from February. And on Friday morning, the first week of March, we had completed a month's of work. So that second sprint was a radical acceleration. And that's what we knew we were really onto something that we know is Scrum today.
And we're all doing daily Scrums now because of it. JJ, I want to bring you into the conversation here because Scrum started in software. Agile started with software developers. You actually represent this from a very different standpoint. You started in journalism, not software. Obviously, you grew up around Scrum, but I'm curious, when did you start seeing Scrum as being universally applicable, not just something that developers did to write code?
Well, when I started doing Scrum was like 2009, I think. And I was doing it in journalism. Really, when I started doing it, the whole kit and caboodle was in 2011 during the Arab Spring. And so I had a team of correspondents and producers in Cairo, and that was a very fast-moving story. And so I actually didn't use the word Scrum at all, because you tell that to a bunch of broadcast journalists, they'll say that's a bunch of management, hooey, like we don't want to do that. We don't need process. We're journalists. And it was just amazing in that. So the first few days, it was just total chaos. We had no process and stuff. And so I just eventually went into this hotel room looking over Tahrir Square, and I put a bunch of started putting Post-it notes on the wall. I was like, what's the most important thing we have to do today? And let's get that, to done. And okay. And as the story moved, and it was very rapid, we were doing 12-hour sprints because we had a morning show and an evening show that we had to do. And, we'd meet right after the last show and say, okay, what are we going to do? And, have a sprint backlog. And, the demo was getting on the air. And that's one of the great things about broadcast journalism is, when you're done is if it, actually gets on the air. So I started doing that. And then I joined, Scrum Inc. a few years later in 2012, a year later or so. And so most of the people at that time were in the technology and software business, but Jeff and I really felt strongly that moving it out of software into other industries was the way to go. So we saw it as a universal human accelerant, not as something that just stuck in it was birthed in the rapid change environment of the technology world, but that rapid technological change was driving everything, and everybody had to move very quickly. And so we started working, with manufacturing. I think it was probably the biggest first one that we did with Toyota and other companies. And then we went into aerospace and then banking and leadership, and it really became clear to me fairly early on, possibly because I didn't come from a technology background. The last time I programmed a computer was probably when I was in college learning C++. It shows how old I am. But it was really, and since then, we've just worked with so many different industries. Like now at Scrum Inc., most of our customers, those people I work with, are not software companies. They're not technology companies, I would say. And that really has shown results. There was an interesting, we were talking to a military group, and they, had been doing it in some of the special forces areas. And we talked to the digital part of this military. They said, oh, that just works for special forces. It'll never work in technology and in software development.
Come full
that
circle.
happened just a couple of weeks ago.
So let's get to one of the more fun questions that we have here. Gentlemen, I know you're both working hard on a 10th anniversary edition of what many people call the Red Book. It's Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. It was a classic bestseller. But we also now have 30 years of data, 30 years to be able to dig into and figure out what is Scrum's secret sauce. We get asked that all the time. So, and I know you both have been kind of thinking about this. JJ, I'll hand the floor back to you, and then I'd like to come and ask you the same question, Jeff. But what do you think that secret sauce is? What makes Scrum work and be as applicable, potentially even more applicable today than it was when it started?
Well, I'm not sure that we've got a lot of data and practices and patterns, but to me, the basic thing of the Scrum framework is not just doing, the 3-5-3. What it is the second and third order effects of getting a team to look at what they're doing, at the system that they're working on, and how do they improve it. And that, requires a lot of things. So one of the things we're talking about, in the new book is we're talking about how do we really talk about psychological safety and mental health and happiness. Like that's become clear that we need to emphasize that. Like it's always been part of it, but it's like, okay, there's been a lot more research on that. So going in, as Jeff said, a lot of our thinking is almost always informed by data and informed by literature and real research. I think, diversity of teams, I think AI is obviously playing a role, though it has, that first small talk team was working, early AI kind of environments. And it's really, I think it's not so much as the root has changed, it's sort of some of the patterns we've seen have changed as we move into other domains.
And Jeff, what about you? What do you think potentially Scrum's secret sauce is?
Well, the thing that the first Scrum team was doing right from the beginning was based on this idea that systems evolve more quickly if you move closer to the edge of chaos. Mm-hmm. The more degrees of freedom, the faster system evolutions. And systems evolve in jumps. They're stable for a while, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get a new feature. And that feature is called, that phenomenon is called punctuated equilibrium in biology. And at the time, the world's first massively parallel computing company, Thinking Machines, was simulating this on the computer. And what it showed was if you made small changes in the right pieces of the system, they would all come together and boom, you get this new feature that would just pop out. And so the team was focused on that. Now, since that time, I had a lot of difficulty communicating that to people, that it's not just the daily meeting, it's what you do in that daily meeting to try to get that system to pop. And it wasn't until one of my Google Tech Talks, I did one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast, and the one in New York was called The Secret Sauce of Scrum. And after that tech talk, the Google architects took me out to dinner. There were 8 or 10 of them. And they said, we are going to get to the bottom of the secret sauce of Scrum. And from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the evening, they pounded me with questions. Until about 10 o'clock, they said, we got it. And they said, what we get is that your team was all able to see the entire system. Because we were building tools that could model systems, we could actually physically see it.
Mm-hmm.
And the team could all say, what spot in that system should we work on today to create a ripple across that system that's going to give us the new feature we want faster? And the Google engineers said, that is the secret, but to do it, every developer needs to understand the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was in Paris a short time later, the Google guys said, hey, we're not doing any Scrum anymore, Jeff. I said, what are you doing? They said, we sit around the table, we've got our backlog on the wall. If there's an impediment, it's at the top. Whoever is free goes and pulls the top backlog item and does it. And if they don't know how, they learn it. So Google learned that if you make every single developer a full stack developer, they can all see the whole system, and collectively they can decide how to get maximum speed. And that is the secret. And it's amazing to me how few teams are actually able to do that.
Yeah, and it sounds like
I want to build on that, Tom, because I think I've been doing a lot of interviews with different groups, doing leading Scrum teams, leading organizations that are doing Scrum. And one of the things they say is the secret sauce is that often when you go into an organization, there's a few real, high performers, and everyone relies on them for everything. And then there's a bunch of people there, and everyone sort of says, they're okay. But when you form them into Scrum teams, it actually frees people up to become really high-performing teams. And I think that shift from an individual contributor mindset, as one project this leader was talking to, was like, okay, I knew that if I did it a traditional way, I'd had like 40 people, but really I'd sit down with like 3 of them and we just knock it out by working late nights and doing all this stuff. But by forming Scrum teams, again, it brought in all the knowledge, is what Jeff was saying, because all these people did have different pieces of the knowledge. And they were able to form high-performing teams that are better than the collection of individuals, far better than even the most high-performing individual. And I think that freeing up of the people and taking advantage of all the creativity and innovation and thought and visibility into how the system works from everybody rather than just a few people is really what makes Scrum remarkable, because it allows people to fully take advantage of their own abilities by being members of a team.
Yeah, and I see Dan just put in chat, cognitive diversity applied to the problem. That's a wonderful way to sum it up. It's that clarity, it's that understanding. Yeah. So let's jump into what is arguably the hottest topic in business and possibly just hottest topic period for 2023. I want to talk a little bit about AI, artificial intelligence. There's a lot of promise. There's a lot of angst, concern, maybe. I want to know, I'm just curious, I'm going to take this in 2 parts. The first part of this question is, how can the Scrum framework be used to help create better AI?
Well, we have Paolo Savicelli in the audience today, and he's written a book on Scrum and AI. And it's a very good book. You should all go read it. So that's about using Scrum to actually develop AI. But even more important, I actually have 2 Scrum teams I'm working with every day, and I'm in a Scrum meeting every day. And what I do is I want ChatGPT to be a member of the team. So the team is putting everything in there, and then we get to a retrospective. We want to hear ChatGPT's point about the retrospective. And it's been fascinating lately. It's been saying the team is not cross-functional enough. It has the whole backlog. It has all the data in Jira. It can see that a story is being blocked because the expert is not available to make it move. And as a result, where the team is starting to cross-train, and even the product owner is jumping in to unblock those stories. And our velocity, I just got out of a sprint review this morning, and our velocity, largely because of that, has gone from about 60 or 70 in the last sprint to 130 this sprint. So AI can help leverage your Scrum team, and that's really important right now in our environment right now. Everybody is getting more productive. The analysts say that the average developer today is twice as productive because of AI. So that means any of you have to be twice as productive to be competitive on the playing field. And so it's critical.
I would agree that a few years ago, there was a chess tournament in which they allowed computers into, and they allowed hybrid teams as well. And listen, your iPhone can beat the best grandmaster to ever live in chess now, right? It's just crazy. And so this Kasparov, the famous Russian chess master, was organizing this. And so he said, okay, it can be computers, it can be grandmasters, it can be grandmasters with supercomputers, it can be anything. And the people who won who were a few people who were working with not supercomputers, couple of computers in their laptops, and they did it. And what Kasparov looked, and they won the tournament. And Kasparov looked at it and says, okay, we had grandmasters, which were good. Then we had machines, which were better. And then we had sort of grandmasters and machines, but it was like single person, and they were really good. And then you had this team that was working as a team and had the chess program on their laptops. They weren't having a thinking machines or a Cray or anything. They're just on their laptops. And he said it's human plus machine plus better process was the group that won. And so that really struck a chord with me. It's like, that's where it is, where it's working with it, as Jeff was saying, as a member of the team, and fusing, because there are things that robots can do a lot better than people. Play chess is one of them. But there are things that people can do better than robots. And so it's like taking what can the robots do better, and using that skill set, if that's the right word, to amplify the team, and having the team amplify the machine by their insights, which they can do in a different way.
I actually know the story, JJ, and it's fascinating because they didn't just win, they destroyed the competition, and none of them were big time chess players, and their laptops were like Chromebooks. They weren't these special super laptops.
Yeah, they weren't grandmaster chess players themselves. They were pretty mediocre chess players.
Yeah. So the other side of this is about how Scrum can be used to better deliver value with AI. And value is a vague term in this sense, but I'm just wondering too, there are a lot of concerns about AI. With strong process, with strong values built into that process, you can help guide a product, an AI as it is. And Scrum is great for machine learning. I mean, the fact that it's those constant iterative loops. Have either of you heard much about using Scrum to help influence AI to make sure that it is not turning into Arnold Schwarzenegger's next movie and instead is a tool for good?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest questions of the day. I mean, we've got some of the industry leaders saying this is really high risk. And I've been encouraging Scrum teams to adopt AI as part of the team, because I think if we move the Scrum values into, every time you talk to one of these systems as it's getting smarter, you're influencing that system. And if we push it towards the Scrum values, it's going to have a better probability of coming out to be something that is human-centric rather than machine-centric. And so I think Scrum can bring a lot to this field in terms of reducing the risk and enhancing the benefit of AI.
So, go ahead, JJ.
Oh, I would just, amplify that in that, the people I talk to who are in the AI field, I talk to, some of the leaders there, and they are afraid. They're like, this could go bad. But what Jeff said is that most of the software development teams or people who are working with machines like this are on Scrum teams. And those values, the Scrum values, of focus, of courage, of commitment, is just built in. And so what I'm hopeful of is, because there is so much Scrum in the world of these teams interacting with the AI, it will, as Jeff said, influence it. On the other hand, they're also really worried. It's not predetermined how it will work. It depends on how we interact with the machines. I always tell my children, don't yell at the Alexa because it's a robot and they'll never forget.
Indeed. I do want to skip ahead of it. We have a ton of questions. I do see we have a couple of participants with their hands raised. We're only going to be taking questions with the Q&A function because with this many participants in the webinar, it's just too hard with the hand up. So please lower your hand and go ahead and use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Gentlemen, we are often asked, what's next? What's next for Scrum? What's the next innovation, the next iteration? So I have both of you here. We have an outstanding community that has joined us to celebrate 30 years. What's next? Who would like to start?
Well, I used to say, when Elon gets to Mars, we're going to have Scrum trainers there. So who in this community is ready? And but today I'm seeing it a little bit more different as the AI starts to become part of the Scrum team and the way they're coaching my teams to be more cross-functional, to be more collaborative, to help one another out. Even if you can help a little, they were saying today, we've learned that even if we help a little bit, someone who has a critical story, it just gets done faster. I'm seeing that the AI can bring a broader perspective. And I'm talking about now, let's put not only all the JIRA data in the AI, let's put all the code in the AI if we're building software, and then see if it can help with the analysis of the whole system and how to evolve it more quickly. And I'm thinking that, having input from the AI can make each individual more productive, but I think we can actually get a systemic effect where you get a team effect, just like we've seen with Scrum from the beginning. The team effect is multiplicative. And I think if we use the broader visibility, the thing that amazes me about ChatGPT, it's like having an 11-year-old kid with the internet in its head at dinner, you get all kinds of crazy responses, but the jewels that come out are totally unexpected because of the broad knowledge. And so by having the AI on the team and saying, hey, you've looked at every one of the millions of lines of code in this system, and you've been looking at it now for a year, what is the next best thing to do?
Right.
That input could be transformative to product development.
I do want to say, though, Jeff, I have a 12-year-old. That frightens me, but I'd like where you're going.
It is scary, yeah.
AJ, you were about to talk.
Sure. Well, one of the areas that we're doing a lot of work in right now is in government. And one of the customers we're working with is one of the provincial governments in Canada. And one of the, we said, well, why are you interested in doing Scrum and being agile? And they actually felt that a non-responsive government is a threat to democracy. That if citizens don't feel that their voices are heard, that the government is not responsive to their needs, it will disillusion. And they're seeing this in many parts of the world, that people get disillusioned with the effectiveness of their democratically elected government. And so that they have actually are embracing Agile, and that's not the only government we're working with a few, is that they have to respond more quickly and to react and engage with the populace who elects them. And they see it as a bulwark for democracy itself. And so that is one of the areas that I'm really excited to be working in, and having an impact at that level of how people choose to govern themselves, and making it more effective.
And making a system, a social contract, really more responsive to the stakeholders of that contract, which are the individuals themselves. That's great. My last question, gentlemen, before we get to the audience questions, and we have a ton, which is wonderful. 30 years, you both have worked hard at this. You both have influenced a lot of people. I'd like you each to share a story. Scrum has touched a lot of lives in a lot of different ways. What's the most memorable story you feel comfortable sharing? JJ, you had the floor last. I'd love to start with you.
So we were at a conference, I don't know, 2015, 2016. I'm not sure if you remember that, but we were together, and this woman came up to us asking us to sign a copy of The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. And she was in tears. Mm-hmm. And she said, "Thank you. You've saved my life. That Scrum saved my life." And which is always, kind of awkward. Like, what do you say back, when someone does that? And I'm not sure how, we both signed the book, and she went away, and that someone had that has stuck with me ever since then. And I have had experiences, very few as dramatic as that, of people saying, I was one way, I didn't like my life, and then I found Scrum and I was able to become a more fully realized person that I liked more. But that woman at that conference, I've never forgotten it. That was a really powerful moment for me.
I think that's happened to me multiple times, and that has always moved me the most. It even happened with the very first Scrum team. I remember in 1995, Easel was acquired by a larger company, and we had to move the team. And some of our team members did not want to move out of the Cambridge area into Western Massachusetts. And they came into my office and they said, this team has been the greatest experience of my life. I've looked forward to go to work every morning. When I got here, it was exhilarating almost every day. I'm never going to find another team like this ever. And then they burst into tears. This is multiple people. So I think the great thing about Scrum is that everybody gets a voice and everybody else has to listen. And that makes people better people. And when everybody rises to a higher level, it's one of those experiences that you just want forever, right? And so again, the story that JJ brought up is one example of where a person has taken Scrum and has completely changed their work environment into something that was painful and oppressive into something that was fun and exhilarating. And that is the most important story, I think, about Scrum.
Well, thank you both for sharing those. I need to take a deep breath after that. That was good. Let's go to questions. A little background here. Scrum Inc. actually, I believe we pioneered really trying to take Scrum to other areas than software. And Eric asks, what do you two think are the biggest challenges to expanding Scrum methodologies outside of software development circles?
Well, I think one of the big differences is, software engineers tend to be very detail oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the Scrum that's run is there's too much overhead. There's too much worrying about getting everything exactly right. So one of the companies that I've started is a healthcare company, and our team is mostly nurses. And so it has to be done with a very light touch. And so I sent all the nurses to training, but then I said, okay, we're just going to put a backlog in the JIRA and we're going to treat patients. That's Scrum, but you know what Scrum is. So we run into problems, and as soon as we have a problem, we say, okay, well, what you learned in the Scrum course, they had an answer to that problem. Do you want to implement it? Yeah, let's try it. And so when we started, this team was a velocity of 10. In about 6 months, it got to a velocity of 50. So again, the 500% improvement took longer than the first Scrum team, but even the nurses can do it, but you need a very light touch.
Mm-hmm. I want to go to the next question here. This is an interesting one because I've seen this a little bit too. Recently, this is from an anonymous attendee. Recently, we saw a series of posts on LinkedIn and YouTube saying that waterfall is back and Scrum is outdated. Thoughts?
Dad, you told me the story many times. It's like we used to try to people could to not do waterfall and to do Scrum and try to convince them and argue with them, and now we just let their competition do it for them. So if there is some way that you are doing a process that is delivering value more quickly and your customers are really happy and you're able to adjust in real time to changing needs and requirements and events and technologies, and it's not Scrum, will do that. I mean, I'm a radical pragmatist, do whatever works. I have not seen a better way of doing it. And I spend a lot of time looking for how to improve team performance and enterprise performance. More importantly, I think now is how do we do this at an enterprise level? And if there is something great, I mean, I was talking to a very large company and I said, well, why are you doing this? Like, well, we want to be more agile. We want to do this, but we're not sure because, and I said, listen, if what you're doing is working for you as a company, as an enterprise, don't do an agile transformation because they're hard. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a lot of upset and pain and, and all this kind of stuff. You're going to have great success, but it's not an easy thing to do at a large enterprise level. And they said, well, yeah, it's not really great, what we're doing. And, we have this waterfall thing of getting all the requirements up front when they know the least. And it's just this, if there is something and it's working for you better than doing Scrum, great. I haven't seen that a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I laugh at that statement because Scrum is based on a massive amounts of data, and I've run huge waterfall projects myself. And the best data in the world on waterfall and Scrum in the same company is from Systematic in Denmark. And they run these huge projects. They're at CMI level 5, and they get over 98% success on time, on budget, whether it's waterfall or not. Okay, so they are better than 98% of the companies in the world. Mm-hmm. And what they say consistently is that waterfall, the budget has to be twice as much and it takes twice as long, even if you do it perfectly. And this is based on the best data in the world for thousands of projects, okay? So that's all you need to know is Systematic's data. That's the data. So that's the book, right? Scrum, twice the work in half the time, right? That's what Systematic has proven. And so if you don't need to do twice the work in half the time, if you want to do half the work in twice the time, then you should stick with waterfall. We've already said that.
Fair enough. This is a great question, and I'm sure you both have strong opinions on this one. What is your biggest frustration in the current agile climate? JJ?
Doing Scrum to do Scrum. And when I talk to our customers as Scrumming, I often start with no one cares how well you do Scrum. No one cares if you have a lot of Post-it notes or good Jira backlog, or you have a retrospective, or all of that kind of things, even at the enterprise level. They care about value delivery to whoever's getting value from whatever the work they're doing, whether it's a customer, whether it's a voter, whether, whoever it is, maybe it's a machine, whatever it is. And that's the thing. And Scrum is to do that, not to do perfect Scrum. As Jeff was saying about working with the nurses, it's not that they're not going to do perfect Scrum, and that's okay. But I often call it like cargo cult Scrum. There was one bank that I worked with a few years ago that had a lot of Scrum masters and a lot of Post-it notes, and people were really focused on making sure that teams are happy and doing all this kind of stuff. And recently, that bank laid off, 5,000, 10,000 Scrum masters, because they were just doing Scrum to do Scrum, not doing Scrum to deliver value. And that's what I see, unfortunately, that the Agile community sometimes goes down this rabbit hole of, I'm more Agile than thou, right? And I don't care. I care, are you using Agile to get results?
It's a means to an end, not the end itself.
Yes.
Jeff, I have a great question for you in particular, and I haven't actually never seen this one before. So Deborah asked, if you could go back and add one thing to the Agile Manifesto, what would it be?
That question was asked at the 10th year anniversary of the Agile Manifesto. We had most of the signatories in the room. We had about 2,000 people at the big Agile conference, Agile 2011, I think it was. And at the end, someone asked that question. And Ron Jeffries said, the second value of the Agile Manifesto, basically deliver early and often is what it's saying. He said, what I would do is I would put a line at the bottom of the manifesto in bold print saying, we really mean working product over comprehensive documentation. That's what we would add to the Agile Manifesto. And that is my opinion still to this day. That is absolutely the most important thing. We were arguing about this on LinkedIn yesterday. They're debating about the minutia of Agile, and they're not delivering, right?
Indeed. Gentlemen, we still have time for a few more questions. One is about skepticism. I'm sure you've heard this one before as well. How do you best deal with leaders skeptical that Agile or Scrum can actually deliver results, that it's worth basically, JJ, the effort that you were talking about that is needed to make it work? Jeff, you want to start?
Nothing speaks louder than success. I mean, we just often what we'll say is, well, just try and experiment, right? It's not that big a deal. If it doesn't work as well, just go back. One of the leaders I talked to, he was doing this pretty high profile project. And I said, okay, we're going to try it for 7 weeks, but we're going to, or 7 sprints, and they're doing 1 week sprints. And he said, and he told his team, like, listen, if it doesn't work, if it's worse, we have enough time before the deadline to go back and do it the old way. Right. He said, because that was the risk. They couldn't, but he said, I knew I could get it out because I think they had like 6 months to get this done. But he said, we're going to start this. We're going to try it for 7 sprints. And the third sprint is always, my third or fourth sprint is always when it's really painful for a new group of teams. And at the 7th sprint, there were still some issues. You're right. There's still some issues they had with, Scrum itself. And he said, okay, do you want to go back to the old way of working? And they said, no, absolutely not. There are some problems that we still need to iterate on how our Agile implementation is working and how our Scrum of Scrums and our, Meta Scrums and all that kind of stuff works. This is, turned into a fairly large group, but it's better. And so it's do an experiment, which is what Scrum is about. Try something, see if it works. I do encourage you to do it for, 7 sprints seems to be a pretty good number, but just try it. And you don't have to bet the whole company on it. You can just try one place and see what happens and do, the scientific method is what I try to tell people.
This is the core of what we try to do everywhere, but the message I'm trying to convey to all of you today, all the Agile coaches, all the Scrum Masters, is when you're talking to the leadership, you need to talk in their language. So the leadership has dozens of things on their agenda. They're prioritizing that, and they're going to prioritize at the top the thing that is going to give them the most financial benefit to meet their quarterly numbers. So even as a Scrum Master, if you run into a senior manager, you need to figure out what's their biggest problem right now. Oh, we're not going to be able to do X, and I'm going to be in trouble with the board. Here's how Scrum can lower your cost, accelerate your delivery, or make the quality better of the product that's going to solve that exact problem. That's what you have to convince the senior management, that you are going to solve. Mainly, it's going to be financial problems. And doing the experiment, as JJ says, is one way to demonstrate that it actually can do that. But we need to raise, when we're talking to leadership, it's all about the numbers. It's all about their board. It's all about company and organizational success.
Yeah, I would just to build on that is just don't use Agile language if they don't understand it. Don't talk about the velocity of your teams or your team happiness or all this kind of stuff. Like, they're good people. They don't really. It's not that they don't care, but they have things that they need to do to achieve. Otherwise, they're in a lot of trouble.
Right.
And so, talk about how you're going to help solve their problems in a language that they can hear.
Quite a few questions about scaling. So I want to ask this one first. When do you absolutely have to scale?
When you have a bunch of people you need to get something large done. I mean, there's certain things you can't do. One team can't do, I don't know. One team can't build Amazon Web Services, right? That's a big thing. And I don't know how many teams they have now. I mean, thousands. Right. But because they have to do something large. If you're trying to do something that is a large, complex, it requires a lot of effort from a lot of people and a lot of knowledge to apply to a big problem. You got to figure out how you organize that. Right. And once you get, and most problems, you need more than 7 or 8 people to solve these days. And so figuring out that when you need to. Now, hey, if you have one Scrum team and they can deliver everything, well, certainly don't hire a bunch more people, because that's expensive, just have the people you need to get it done. But usually, and so the companies working now are usually in the thousands of people because they're doing something really big. And so that's what I would say to do it. But if you could do it with one team, don't bother, because, why would you hire more people if one team can get it done?
Right.
I think we always want to descale first if possible. So one of our local companies here in the Boston area, they had 300 developers all doing Scrum, but it wasn't very good Scrum. And so I said, let's take 10 teams and I'll show you how to make them go 5 times faster. They were going to hire 300 more people. I said, if we can make 10 teams go 5 times faster, you won't need to hire any more people.
Yeah.
And we did that. Now, foolishly, the CEO of that company did hire 300 more people. Then he started running out of money, and his investors wouldn't cough up more money, and they had to sell the company as a discount to Hewlett Packard. Okay, so the thing you do not want to scale is the number of people.
Absolutely.
And right now in the software business, particularly, they're descaling. Every major software company has laid off about 10,000 people in the last 6 to 9 months. Mm-hmm. They're descaling.
Yeah. I do want to bring up one last question. This is actually posed in terms of the federal government, but I'm going to make it a little bit broader here. The question is, I continue to see people in the US federal government saying, quote, "We can't do Scrum as written," unquote, because of all the federal requirements for audits and oversight. I know this isn't true. What would you say to them? Now, before you answer that, gentlemen, I'm going to blow this up a little bit bigger because we hear that a lot from highly regulated industries as well as governments. So let's make this bigger, more applicable to everyone. What do you say to the people who say you cannot do Scrum because we are highly regulated or we have a ton of things that by law we have to get checked off?
Well, I was actually at dinner last night with the CIO of a medical device company. You know, they put stuff in your body, right? And the regulations on human implantable medical devices there are a lot of them for good reason, right? You don't want to put stuff into people's bodies that kills them. But they will do Scrum. And what they do is they say, okay, the regulatory stuff is part of the definition of done. The story is not done unless, and it is getting the regulation into what the team is building. So the team knows it has to meet these standards. And even if the standards are ludicrous, like I know one government group that I work with, they have like 20 different agencies all asking questions. They have to get audited all the time to make sure they're compliant. I'm like, okay, we all know that's kind of silly at one level, and it's not really helping anything to do this. But, you know, gravity is kind of annoying too. So we just accept that that's part of the work that we have to do to meet it. And sometimes, as I said, with like the human implantable medical devices, it's really important. But the other thing is also, what exactly do the regulators want? Because often people will make up stuff. I think, Dad, you were telling about some company that you worked with. It was another medical company, and they had like 12,000 pages of stuff that they submitted to the FDA for approval. And then they actually worked with the regulators saying, what do you actually need to meet the regulatory compliance? And they got it down to 4,000 pages.
It was actually
needed those 4,000 pages.
600 pages.
A lot easier.
Yeah.
So even at 600 pages, that's still quite a lot. Go ahead, Jeff.
I used to be co-chair of the medical data group of HL7, which is the largest healthcare. And I had FDA guys and CXOs from big companies on that. The FDA wants a product that works, and they want traceability from design to the product as implemented. And Scrum does that much more effectively. In the domain, and maybe JJ can say more about this, in the domain of certain government agencies like the military, in the United States, it is law that anything to do with software is done with an agile process. But the military, whether it's our military or other militaries that we're working with, are saying the terrorists are iterating faster than we are. If we don't start scrumming, we're not only going to be obsolete, but our country and our democracy is threatened. I don't know how much JJ has been doing a lot of work with the militaries. I don't know how much.
Well, unfortunately, we do need to end on time, and you took us right to the time box. So before everybody logs off, I do want to say a few things. First of all, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, JJ. Always a pleasure to have your insights. I want to thank JJ, Alyssa, Melanie, Veronica, and Beth, the team that is producing this behind the scenes. And thank you all very much for joining us to celebrate what is really a remarkable milestone, the 30th anniversary of Scrum. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you. And thank everyone here, because Scrum would not be what it is without all of the people on this call, the millions of people who are doing Scrum. That's what makes Scrum. That's what makes it have the impact. You all.